Hi, folks. Councilman Rasmussen here, coming to you. This is the fifth in a series of videos that I've done today, talking about the budget conversations that have been happening over the course of the last couple of months, and how they impact the taxes, the operations, the infrastructure of our community. Trying to give people a better idea of the complexity of a lot of what is happening in town and ultimately the impact that that has on us as residents and business owners in the community when it comes to the operations of the community and our tax rates. So a lot of this comes from conversations I've had and questions that have been put out to council over the last couple of months, really focusing around the budget and trying to explain some of the more complicated pieces in a way that I hope lets people have a better understanding of why and how some decisions are made. Every single one of these is really complicated, so we started off talking about how tax assessments work and the county versus the state tax assessment, or sorry, county versus the town tax assessments. We talked about the pension situation that the town is in. Talked about the new developments, residential developments in our community, and sort of what can and can't the town impact in the way of those. I've talked about the utilities that the town has, how we provide them, how they ultimately benefit our community, and why it's so important that we invest in the infrastructure for those utilities. And this last one, I want to focus on economic development. This one's probably one of the hardest ones because it is a space that matters a lot, but it's also a place where the town has very, very limited tools or resources that we can use that really impact it. So when people think about economic development, the things that come to mind are jobs, our businesses, things like that. When I think about economic development, I really break it down into three buckets. There's economic development that is like employment center. So this is large employers, factories, warehouse and distribution, medical facilities, things like that ultimately impact a lot of people because they employ a lot of people. They bring jobs and they bring other business and they bring a variety of things to a community. Then all the way on the other side are small businesses. These are the mom and pop businesses, like what I have here in this community. These are those smaller employers. They're owned by individuals. They are your restaurants that aren't franchises. They're your small shops. They're what people often think of as like the lifeblood of small business. And then there's the folks that are in the middle. These are your larger chain sort of things, right? They're employers, they're places that we shop, they're places that we eat, right? But like we're talking chain restaurants, we're talking grocery store chains, pet food stores and things like those chain restaurants and chain businesses that aren't owned by an individual who hopefully lives in the community, but they are an integral part of providing services and things to folks in our town. All three of them are different. What it takes to attract and support all three of those are different. And I think that I want to talk about them individually so people have a little bit of better idea about what the town really can and can't do to help try and attract and retain those kind of businesses. I'll start with probably the easiest one, which are those businesses in the middle. We're talking chain restaurants, fast food restaurants, dollar stores, Tractor Supply, those chain businesses that we see a lot of out on the Route 13 corridor. Those companies are some of the most sophisticated retail and food service businesses around. They know an amazing amount about what it takes for each one of those locations to be successful, and they don't take risks. They do not move into and want to set up in a community where they do not know that their chances of success are very, very high. Right? Starbucks doesn't build in a community where it's not sure that it's able to be successful. And there's lots of metrics that they're going to use to determine whether that is. Number one is population. The saying is heads in beds. How many people live within a radius of that business? For many of these, if there are not enough people living within a certain radius of that, they'll never consider a community because it's just not on their radar. They know that there's not enough people there to support them. Another very important metric for these folks is median income. If you have a high enough median income and enough people within a certain distance, these businesses know that it is an easy bet, right? Their chances of success are very, very high. And then they're going to look at other things too. They will look at competition, but you'll know this, right? Just because there happens to be a McDonald's in a town doesn't mean that every other fast food restaurant's not going to want to be there, right? Because they also know McDonald's has very sophisticated metrics, and if McDonald's can be successful, well then so can, Taco Bell or Burger King or whatever it happens to be, Wendy's. So when it comes to attracting those kind of businesses, honestly, the town has very little that we can do. If we meet their metrics, if we have enough people and a high enough median income, and there's a reasonable place where they could purchase property, they're going to. In fact, most of the time when we find out one of these businesses is interested in our town, they've already done all that work. They've already made a decision. Oftentimes they've already negotiated and purchased property or are just about finished with that before we ever even hear from them. We have no say. They know how to meet all of the zoning requirements. They know how to go through all of that process. Very sophisticated attorneys and folks like that. And ultimately, they make that decision entirely outside of what the town can ultimately do. When folks, we hear this a lot, like, oh, why doesn't the town bring a Chick-fil-A or I can't remember. They've got the little store where you buy your stuff, and they've got a breakfast food restaurant, things like that, or a Bob Evans, or a Cracker Barrel, or things like that. So the reality of it is that towns don't bring those businesses in. Those businesses they take their metrics, they look at communities that meet the demographics, meet the transportation needs, meet the things that they're looking for, and then they plop themselves down in those communities. You don't call up Cracker Barrel and say, hey, why don't you build one here? That's just not how that works. I know people would like to believe that the town could go out and do things to do that, but unless you meet all of their needs, they're not interested. Now, if you think that you do meet their needs, there are conventions, there are big trade shows and things, and you can go and rent a booth, set up yourself. Here's Smyrna, Delaware. Here's our demographics, and try and pitch yourself to businesses like that. But the reality of it is if you're not on their short list because of they're pulling census data constantly, it's not going to happen, right? Now, where it can happen is in small businesses. Small businesses are the mom and pop shops. They are those things that we think of and sort of, get nostalgic about. I own a couple of small businesses in this town. Small businesses are risky, very, very risky. And the people who want to open small businesses are the kind of people who are willing to take risks, not chain restaurants. They don't take risks. Right? When it comes to opening a small business in a town, it is really, really scary. There's a lot of different factors that go into it, and there's very limited things that from the town side that we can ultimately do to help small businesses be successful. We can help out. We can provide little bits of facade grants if you're fixing up a building. We can help shepherd through the permitting process and make sure that goes pretty well. But I'll be honest, having gone through it multiple times, it's not that hard, right? It's not permits. It's not the business license fee, which is like $100 a year. It's not those things that prevent small businesses from opening. It is finding individuals who are willing to take the risk and do the work to be successful. Something that's also really tricky about small business, and I have a lot of conversations with small business owners here in this town, is understanding what's likely to be successful. I think this is a place where the town can engage in more conversations with folks. But I will give you an example. We have a lot of places that sell cheesesteaks in Smyrna, right? You can go to Main Street Market, you can go to Capriati's, you can go to a number of the different chain places. There's a lot of places in this town where you can go out and get a cheesesteak. If you want to open another small business and you think that you're going to sell cheesesteaks and that's going to be able to be successful, then you've got to steal every one of your customers from another place that's already making and selling them a cheesesteak. That's really tough. In the small business world, or in all the business world, there's two different types of marketing, right? There's new customer acquisition, which is how do you get a new customer to walk through the door, and then there's customer retention, which is how do you get them to come back. New customer acquisition is really, really expensive. And if you want to open a cheesesteak place downtown, then you've got to get people to decide that they're not going to buy that cheesesteak from Pat's or Capriati's or Main Street Market or some other location, and they're going to buy it from you. That's really, really hard and really expensive. And if you don't have a massive marketing budget and you don't have a deep understanding of what it takes, you're not willing to hire a full-time marketing person and probably pay them more than you're going to make, then your chances of being successful in something like that are really hard. Also, if you're a small business and you want to do one specific thing, right? You want to sell, we had a business try to open here in downtown that wanted to be a candy store. Right? You can buy candy at every pharmacy, grocery store, just about any place that you could possibly imagine. They wanted to open a specialty candy store and do things that were around that. Unfortunately, it didn't work. It's really, really specific, and they had really one business line. If you're going to open a business and think that it's going to be successful based on foot traffic in our community, you're going to struggle, right? And so having conversations like that with small businesses is a form of economic development, helping people understand what types of marketing support and things that they need. The town doesn't have a budget to pay for a marketing person. I wish we did. I think it would be vital to this community in order for us to grow and be successful. But it's not something that other people have been willing to fund. So without helping in the way of marketing support, really all we can do is try and be encouraging to those small businesses to open in our community and try and encourage our neighbors to go and support them. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And then the last piece on economic development, this is the big piece. This is the employment center piece. This is if you're trying to attract a warehouse and distribution system, or you're trying to attract a larger manufacturer. These are large corporations typically, or mid-sized corporations if you're looking at like small to mid-sized manufacturers who are looking for a place to set up their shop because they need additional capacity or they want to move for one reason or another to be in a different market. Typically when we're talking about these kind of folks, we're talking about what we call IORP, what most people refer to as industrial parks. That's the type of place where they're likely to be located. And we have two of those in our town. There's the Smyrna Business Park, which is mostly full at this point. Most of the buildings are built up out there. We also have our town public works and our power station out there. And then there is the Duck Creek Business Campus. The Duck Creek Business Campus, so in the business park, all of those are individual lots that are privately owned by individual property owners. In the Duck Creek Business Campus, that is all owned by, sorry, I may have said that wrong. The Smyrna Business Park is privately owned individuals. The Duck Creek Business Campus is all owned by one company that owns a number of different business parks all around this area called KRM. KRM is a landowner. They build spec buildings on their property in some cases and then lease them out to tenants. So the two big buildings that you see out in the business park, you can see them from 13. Those have both been built by KRM and are being leased out to tenants. Sometimes they'll partner with a business that wants to build its own building. They'll enter into a long-term ground lease, and a company will come in and build a very large building. We had one of these that was very interested and working very, very hard with KRM to get there, that could have potentially brought hundreds of jobs to this community. Unfortunately, the rug got pulled out from underneath us on that one by DelDOT. Many years ago, traffic studies were done to determine what sort of traffic could be supported through KRM Business Park, how that would work. We had all of this information, and when it came down to it, when we're moving through those final approvals, DelDOT decided that they wanted to do all of that over again. The people who had been there and had done it had left, they'd moved on. The information was a few years old, even though traffic flow patterns and things hadn't really changed, and they basically killed it because the people who wanted to build that business had a deadline. We need to be built by a certain period of time, or it doesn't make sense for us to move forward. And in the end, we couldn't meet that. So this is a place where economic development and the town really intersect, and the place where we need to figure out how to invest to do more. That example of DelDOT pulling the rug out from underneath that really, I think, hit a bunch of folks because we were steps away, nearly to the point of making an announcement that this was going to happen. And figuring out how the next one doesn't leave is really, really important to figuring out how we can bring those businesses, because ultimately those businesses change our tax base. Right now, 72% of our taxes are derived from residents, from homes, and 28% come from all of the commercial buildings in our town. It would be ideal to have that be closer to 60% coming from homes and 40% coming from commercial businesses. In order for that to happen, we need to fill that industrial park. So other communities have dealt with this problem too, and they found ways to work with this. Sometimes it takes a big investment up front. This is an example from Middletown. They invested and did what are called transportation infrastructure districts. They basically did all of the planning, got all of the legal sign-offs from DelDOT. Everything was legal and committed. And if somebody moves in and wants to build a manufacturing plant or a distribution plant in one of those areas, in one of those districts, DelDOT can't step in at the last second and kill that deal like they did to us. But that took a huge investment in time and money on the part of that community and the leaders in that community to make that happen. That's the kind of economic development that the town ought to be engaging in. We also need to be able to provide those businesses with the right infrastructure. In a lot of cases, that's water, sewer, and electric. Somebody wants to move in and have a large manufacturing plant or something like that, they're going to need a lot. Most likely a lot of electric, but they could need a lot of those other utility services. And we need to be able to guarantee that we can provide those and provide them at a reasonable rate, right? But if you watch my other videos on utilities and things, you'll hear our utility rates, while right now are actually pretty competitive from other compared to other municipalities, they used to be pretty high. Not the highest by any means, not the highest. However, on the higher side. Taxes are one thing, right? Those are easy and predictable. Utilities are another. If you're a huge utility user, that could be one of your largest expenses. I will tell you, hands down, there's no doubt that the Walmart distribution center, their utility bills far exceed their tax bill, right? So having higher utilities or unpredictable utilities or unreliable utilities can be a bigger detractor from locating in a community than the tax rate or the impact fees that are associated with that property. So this is an area where us making some of these decisions to not increase our taxes but increase our utility rates may have hurt us in some of our economic development activities over the last decade or more. We need to get back in balance, having utility rates that where they are now, fairly middle of the road, making sure that the infrastructure is there to support those type of employment businesses, and ultimately then having taxes that are covering our operating costs. So there's work for us to do. We can also find ways to invest more. One of the things that we included in the budget that we did we used to spend every penny of our what we call one-time funds. Probably the largest of these are the transfer taxes, real estate transfer taxes. Every year the town gets real estate transfer taxes. Some years it's low. This year it's, maybe it'd be $600,000. In other years it's been multiple millions of dollars. The smart thing to do is to use those one-time funds to invest in one-time needs for the community. But we haven't done that. Those funds have all been put into the general fund and used to pay for, the police and town hall and streets and those things like that, leaving us without any sort of strategic revenue that we could use to pay to create a transportation infrastructure district or pay to invest in some of that additional infrastructure that might be necessary to attract businesses like that to our community. So it matters how we pay our operating expenses because it can limit our ability to make investments that make economic development more feasible. And so that conversation, economic development, is a big piece of any budget conversation because there's only a limited amount of resources and we need to be able to invest in the future of our community if we want to be able to see it grow. So that's a little picture of how I see economic development happening here. From the small businesses, the people who are willing to jump in and take risks, and sometimes you work 7 days a week and you don't get to go on vacation for a few years because you've got to do what it takes to have your business be successful. Those middle tier where they don't take risks at all, they only invest where they know they're able to be successful. And then those bigger ones that are tough to get, they take a lot of investment on the front end, but ultimately they bring lots of jobs to our community. We need all three. All three help grow our tax base. The more our tax base grows, the less our tax rate has to grow. So they're all vitally important, but there's different strategies and there's different ultimate levers that we can use to bring those to our town. So this is the fifth of the videos, probably the last one I'm going to manage to get to today. I've talked about new development and the rules and sort of what we can and can't do about that. I've talked about utilities and the importance that they play in our community. I've talked about our tax rates and our tax assessments and how those are different. Talked about the needs of our pension system and why investing in that is something we need to be doing better at right now. So a lot of stuff. If you've watched all of these, please let me know if you have questions. Reach out. Share these with your friends and your family, people in town if they have questions. Much rather have you watch these videos and learn a little bit about it rather than sort of jump onto the Facebook and believe things that people just make up all the time. Obviously, reach out if you have any questions. You can find my contact information. You can get me here through Facebook. You can find my contact information on the town website. You can find me at my businesses right downtown. But please be engaged, ask questions, reach out, talk to folks. The more all of us know and understand the complexities of what's going on in our community, the better decisions we'll ultimately be able to make to create the type of place we all want to live. So thanks again. As I get more ideas for some of these videos, you might see more of these roll out in the next, hopefully, few days or weeks or so. Thanks. Take care.